Hello, and welcome to Ask an Archaeologist. I'm Paul Duncan McGarrity.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask an Archaeologist podcast. And welcome to season 4, in fact. It's very nice to have you all back. Thank you for waiting around whilst I had a slight break. It's been interesting. I am now the father to a 5-month-old baby boy. I'm very tired. That's probably the easiest way of describing it. It is an exhausting undertaking, which everyone told me about beforehand, but you don't really take that into account until you actually go through it, and then you're like, gosh, babies don't know they have hands, and that's cute, but they also don't know they have eyelids, which means that they don't sleep. They just sit there looking at you like, oh, I don't know what to do, and I'm like, I don't know what to do, and so he doesn't, It's been fun. It continues to be fun. But yes, it's nice to be back as well. Lots gone on. Lots of fun bits and bobs. Done some community archaeology in the day job, and even managed to fit in a little bit of teaching some workshops on behalf of Layers of London, which is, by the way, if you get a chance to have a look at it, this is going to be my tip. If you're working on anything or you're just interested in seeing some really cool maps, pop to the Layers of London website and have a look there. They've digitised a lot of sort of standout pieces of historical information, like a poverty map, bomb damage maps, various other information. It's a really, really exciting project. So go and have a look at that website. And I, as part of that, got to deliver some really interesting standing buildings workshops, teaching people how to look at historic buildings. It was really fun. Got out of the office, got to even walk around some old buildings as well. Sometimes the workshops did descend into me just going, oh, look at those bricks. Oh, and then watching a team of interested individuals going, God, he really likes bricks, doesn't he? Yeah. So I'm sure that was quite a shared experience for them. And I mean, it's an interesting time for me. There's the potential shadow of a redundancy in the company that I work for, but we'll see how that all pans out. I might keep you up to date with it if I never speak of it again. It really could have gone either way. But it's been certainly interesting because it's made me have a think about what actually counts as an archaeologist. What makes an archaeologist? If I, end up having to change the day job, will I stop being an archaeologist? And I honestly can tell you that I don't think I will. I believe it's, for me, such a strong part of my identity and informs how I approach so many aspects of my life, not least of which it's given me a lovely basis in critical thinking. Elements of it have helped me keep sane as as I try and wade my way through more and more information. That whatever happens, I'm going to, I am an archaeologist. That is, it's in my bones, ironically, at this point. So yeah, interesting. There's other interesting things that are going on. Obviously, the main one is the bub. He is bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. He's boisterous. He's currently kicking his grandmother in the next room. And he, like I say, he's a lot of work. So there's going to be a slight change to the order of things for season 4, which is that just for now, whilst he gets used to me as a dad and I get used to him as a kid, we go through all of the different teaching and learning experiences. We're going to shift the podcast from fortnightly to monthly. I hope you understand why this is happening. I am a one-man band of production. I go out and I do all the interviews and record everything myself and do all the editing and all the advertising. So, just to fit in enough time watching him grow up, I hope you will grant me this leeway to change things. For this, probably, hopefully just this season, when everything settles down, we will reevaluate and hopefully we'll get back up to fortnightly episodes. But for now, it's going to be a slightly slow pace, but it's going to be the same sort of fun and games as we've had previously on the podcast. There'll be lots of chances to send in questions throughout the entire run, and I've got a bunch of really interesting interviews lined up, so I'm quite excited about them. It's been really fun. We've got this one today, which is with Florence Smith Nicholls. They have worked as a planning archaeologist, so we'll get talking about what you need to do in that particular aspect of the job. But also, they have, it's quite an interesting position because they're looking at something called archaeogaming and all of the aspects that takes in. Within the same question of what does it mean to be an archaeologist, you can also ask what counts as archaeology. So I'll be talking to them about computer games and the archaeology of computer games and how computer games and archaeology what the intersection is there. And it's a really interesting conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. I look forward to hearing from you all throughout the year. It's going to be fun. Here's season 4. We're ready to rock and roll. So please enjoy this next episode of Ask an Archaeologist. Hello, Florence. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for doing the interview. Are you well?
Yeah, just came back from work, so yeah.
Oh, right, fair enough. I've got to say, so we're going to get into a bit of your career and what you do and the very interesting stuff that you write about as well with regards archaeology and gaming. But the first thing that I've got to say is this is incredibly remiss of me. We were colleagues until very recently. Is that correct?
True. This is true, yeah. I used to be at Museum of London Archaeology as a planning archaeologist, which is, of course, where you work.
Yes, this is where I work. And what I can tell you is I came around the corner in the office to ask you if you'd be up for doing, like, if you were still up for the interview. And someone went, she left a few weeks ago. I was like, God, I'm really bad at this.
Oh, no. I did wonder when you sent me the message, actually. I was thinking, oh, God, actually, yeah, did you... Would that have happened? So, oh, no, sorry about that, yeah.
No. I mean, never apologise for having a career. It was just a surprise.
True. So I'm now working for a place called Land Use Consultancy, which is a very different world from Mola, really? As you might expect. Yeah, kind of working for a shiny consultancy where they do lots of different things as well as heritage, which has been an interesting change. But I do miss being surrounded by archaeologists, I've got to say.
Well, we might as well talk about that then, first of all. So you said you were a planning archaeologist, right?
Yes.
That sounds like... that just sounds like someone who makes sure that they've got their sandwiches packed.
Yeah, 100% right with that. I remember when I first realised that was my kind of like job title, and I thought, what does this mean? What is a planning archaeologist?
Yeah. Somebody who's just really good at making sure everyone comes to the after site drinks.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that would be quite a good job. Like,
Yeah.
maybe that's what it was the whole time, and I was just, didn't read the job description. It should have been that. No.
So, what is a planning archaeologist?
So essentially, it's about doing the research for a site before it gets developed. So what I did at Mola was produce a lot of things called desk-based assessments, which is you'll kind of look at a site where they're gonna, I don't know, put a block of flats, and you look at the geology of the site. You'll look at historic maps and things like that will help you give an idea of what will have been there previously, if at all. Might have just been a field or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But also you look at kind of past excavations as well to see, did they find anything interesting here, or have we got really nothing to worry about? So that's kind of the planning side of it, in terms of planning for what's the best kind of approach in terms of mitigating any harm to any possible archaeology, and also because it's part of the planning process. So in order to get planning permission, developers have to have a desk-based assessment.
Okay, so what does a desk-based assessment actually sort of entail? Like, if you were producing one of those reports, what are the things that would go in it from start to finish?
Okay, so kind of at first it's just sort of the kind of boring introductory kind of stuff, where you've just kind of this general kind of background. It's this kind of company that's commissioned us to do the work. But then you have a geology section, and the idea is that you kind of want to get the best idea of what the kind of depth of geology is going to be on the site. So if there's going to be lots of made ground, that might indicate previous development, and that might kind of indicate what depth you might find archaeological deposits. If there's going to be stuff like alluvium, kind of like stuff that's silted up over time, this kind of thing. So kind of getting that sort of background to the site. But then you also want to look at the historic environment record. So in London, that'll be kind of just sort of like a centralised kind of Greater London HER. But if you're in other parts of the country, there'll be kind of specific HERs there, and you get data from them.
Yeah, can I just stop you? What is an HER?
Historic environment records. So that's kind of a database of past investigations, so past archaeological investigations, anything from a full-blown open excavation to kind of small sort of like a watching brief, where, say, for example, an archaeologist has gone along and just watched while works are being done. But you also get other things like monument records, so kind of like old buildings of interest in a particular area, or if there's been sort of just like a chance find of something like a Roman coin or something, that will be recorded in there. So yeah, it's quite a variety of different records.
So like if any old Tom, Dick or Harry is just like wandering past the path, is like, oh, that's exciting, it goes down to even that kind of level of detail.
It can do. Often with those kind of find spot records, which is what they're called, it will be that it can be like a bit older, so maybe sort of early 20th century, maybe even late 19th century, where someone's made a record of, we found a coin here, and someone was like digging in their garden or something, and you can find sort of like kind of vague record of they found a Roman coin.
That's fantastic.
It is really good.
You've got Victorian gardeners records in there.
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of things. Up to like just kind of, here's this nice kind of Victorian building.
Have you ever had like a standout thing where you've had to quote something in the past and been like, this is ridiculous that we've gone into this?
I can't think of something off the top of my head. I feel like, you definitely come across kind of, random things like that. The best ones are always kind of the older ones, where it's like, this guy, whatever his name is, like literally, yeah, like you say,
Oh, yeah. Lord Henry Farquhard
I
has
guess
discovered a small blade.
it's probably closest to that. You're right, actually.
Magnificent.
Some kind of antiquarian who's gone along and gone like, aha, and then of course he's recorded in association with that find for all time.
Yeah, in excruciating detail. A rock that may have been picked up by a man from the past or a woman. Let's not be sexist.
Yeah. It's kind of strange. And then you just sort of get a lot of kind of duplication as well, where it'll just be like clearly a lot of archaeologists at different points got excited about a particular thing. So like, and then so it's been entered multiple times, or I don't know what's happened. This is my interpretation of it, but it seems to come up a lot. And then you're looking for it, and you're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. But, a super well recorded wall.
Yeah, or something like that.
I see.
But yeah, it's really useful, and that's like a key resource that you use to kind of work out, okay, what's the likelihood that you're going to find something here?
So this idea that people kind of like archaeological digs start randomly, and everyone has this idea of, how did you find it by chance? Did you come across it? This isn't really the case, is it?
No.
Right.
I mean, it's a funny one because essentially a lot of the job is about really trying to predict. In some ways, it's about trying to predict what you might find, but I suppose it's the general kind of archaeological potential.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you can't ever be kind of 100% certain, you're definitely going to find this here, or there'll be definitely nothing there. I mean, there may be sometimes where there's been a huge basement, and that's going to have taken out anything that will be left. Yeah. There are cases like that. But I suppose it's trying to use all the available evidence that you have to make your best kind of informed sort of assessment, really, of what the like archaeological sensitivity of the site is.
Is this always an area of archaeology you had an interest in? Is this what you wanted to pursue as a career?
No.
What? 6-year-old you is not sat there going, do you know, one day I really want to do pre-planning desk-based assessments, like Indiana Jones doesn't.
No, definitely. I don't think that ever was a thought that I had at that age. But it's funny because I feel like I wasn't really aware of desk-based assessments as a thing probably until I'd started my career as an archaeologist. So it definitely wasn't something that I'd wanted to do right from the beginning. I became a field archaeologist back in... let me think about this. I first started doing field archaeology as a job in 2014, but first was actually digging in London in 2015. And I was working for a small company called Compass Archaeology. And because there was only kind of 4 of us permanently employed there, you essentially had to do everything because, there's only 4 people. That led to me doing a desk-based assessment. And I realised through that there was the potential to kind of do a lot of this kind of background research, which I was really interested in. And kind of having got that experience with Compass, that's then how I got the job at Mola.
I mean, a 4-person company sounds like a real crash course into doing archaeology, though.
Definitely, yeah. I think looking back on it now, I really do appreciate it because you essentially would see the whole life cycle of a project from desk-based assessment to then writing a written scheme of investigation, up to actually going out, doing the excavation, watching brief, whatever it was, to then writing the report afterwards, kind of sifting through some of the finds as well.
Yeah.
A lot of different skills had to be kind of picked up.
Driving the van, getting the lunch, fixing the TV, whole work.
Yeah, anything. Yeah, it's true. Like anything that needed to be done. Actually,
we've got a mouse problem. Roll your sleeves up. I'll get them.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember actually. I had to, because we would sort of what's the word? we need to use like specialists to look at particular things because we just didn't have enough people to cover that. So sometimes what would happen is we'd have to like send out a load of pottery to a pottery specialist by post, which is an interesting way of doing it. So you'd have to like I don't know, quadruple wrap like this to make sure it wouldn't fall apart under the weight of it. And then of course there was sort of like awkward moment where I'd have to go to the post office and they'd ask you, what's in it, and I was like, well, it's like all bits of pottery. They just look at you like
okay.
It's like it's such a surreal experience to have.
It's just the irreplaceable record of our ancestors. So first class.
Gosh, I don't even know if it was first class.
Oh no! Well, it's been in the ground for ages. I mean, second class isn't going to cause any problems.
I'm sure it was fine. It always survived.
Yeah, of course it did. Of course it did. Am I right in saying that you had some previous experience working in Knossos? Is that right?
Yes, that is right. Yeah.
So was Knossos before Compass?
Yes. Yeah.
So then, tell me what it was like to go from. I'm assuming that was kind of a research excavation, or you could tell me about Knossos.
Yeah.
What it was like to go from that to Compass to Mola.
Oh yeah. Okay. So my experience at Knossos, it was actually a kind of museum internship. It's called like the Knossos curatorial internship, and essentially that involved funny, we're talking about pottery. It involved taking photographs of a lot of pottery, digitizing kind of the records that they had of them there.
Yeah, that sounds like a proper internship. Real sort of like no one else wants to do this.
Yeah, it was a bit like that. Yeah. No, I mean, it was really interesting actually, because there was a lot of stuff that I got to see that, because it hasn't been published yet, it's not, I don't think it's generally kind of stuff that would have been available to the public. And it's not a public museum. It's very much kind of like a storage research museum. But it was incredibly interesting because there was all this stuff that had been excavated, I think originally in like the late 70s to early 80s, and just hadn't really been looked at properly since. So you had all this kind of like for example, kind of like prehistoric stone tools that were just in these like brown paper bags, and people had just scrawled like the details of where they were from on the paper bags. And these things were disintegrating, and part of the job was trying to kind of essentially like rescue these like dissolving records and kind
That's amazing. Rescue the records from being recorded.
Yeah. And it was bizarre because like at the time, clearly people, while filling out these brown paper bags as they did, had like ended up getting bored or something, and they would write notes to each other so you could see. Or like I think like people had found like shopping lists as well that were just in there among the finds. So
oh wow,
yeah, just like really kind of bizarre stuff. So that was.
So when you're seeing that, like this is quite early on in your archaeology career, are you thinking, "Oh God, what have I got myself into?"
I guess I suppose actually I'd probably already had that moment earlier, if that makes sense. Because actually, I on the timeline of my career, my first job was with Archaeological Solutions in Bury St Edmunds, and that was a very kind of trial by fire kind of, it was on a quarry site, and it was like just go and dig some test pits and.
Okay. Did you feel like you were ready to hit the commercial world when you left university?
100% no. I really don't think I was not prepared at all, and I think I did a lot of learning on the job, and there was a lot of just kind of aspects of what commercial archaeology was, kind of that whole process of doing field work for a start, but even all the other stuff that I've learned since being like a planning archaeologist, which puts that kind of in perspective. I feel like I really had no kind of grasp on that. So yeah, it was definitely a shock to the system. And then I kind of almost kind of running away to Knossos. to sort of, that was my way of dealing with it, which I was incredibly lucky to do. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it was.
How did you get the internship?
So I think let me think about this. I can't remember. Was it on Badger? I'm trying to think about this now, but I know
Badger's the British Archaeological Jobs
yes,
Resource
exactly.
website.
Yeah. So I saw it, and because it was with the British School at Athens, which is this kind of British institution of classical archaeology and of classics. It's like,
Yeah.
describe this. And I'd sort of done a postgraduate kind of mini course with them on Bronze Age pottery. So it's kind of like the running theme. So I already had that connection, and I was interested in it. So I applied and was lucky enough to do it. But I think kind of talking about sort of like career progression, and I think it's like important to be sort of like transparent, say like, for example, that wasn't a paid internship, and like looking back on that now, I think the fact that I was able to go there because I had some savings, that's not kind of a an average experience, I think. But yeah, I mean, it was great. Was there actually I was there from January till March, so it wasn't really sunny, so it wasn't that kind of like culture shock between like being but
you're not sunbathing whilst you sort through other people's shopping lists.
Yeah. So there was kind of that, and then there was a period of kind of I think a few months I came back and was just sort of kind of looking for work and thinking, what am I going to do? And there, luckily, again, went on Badger, which is an incredibly useful resource to have. Went on that and then applied for the job at Compass, and I think because I already had that experience of archaeological solutions, that led me to go on to there. And I think because my first job had been kind of a bit a bit of a difficult experience for me, I feel like in contrast, kind of working at Compass, being in London, that kind of felt I think that kind of reinvigorated my
you got the love back again.
I think so. Was really lucky to work on some really interesting sites with them and get all that kind of wider experience as well.
So what prompted the move to Mola then?
I think the thing about the job with Compass, it was great in that you were kind of doing a bit of everything, but at the same time that could also be a bit kind of I think a bit just stressful for me, because sometimes it would be like you come in one day, it's like, oh, go out to a watching brief suddenly, and then come, so it'd be kind of doing different things, and I think that just didn't quite suit me.
The strength and the weakness is the same thing. You don't know what you're going to do from day to day.
Yeah. Which again, like in some ways that's great, because I suppose you could say, well, it's not boring in that sense. Something
yeah. Being in the middle of a war zone is not boring. It doesn't mean you want to be there.
And then
there's just stuff happening all the time. I'm being shot at.
I suppose that, at least in archaeology we never have to deal with anything like that.
I know, we've got the trenches, not the gunfire.
Exactly. The job came up and I was thinking, I kind of felt like my strength lied with that sort of background research kind of aspect, so I thought, okay, I'll go for this, and was lucky enough to get the position.
And so you came into Mola and you did the planning archaeology, which is what we've discussed very briefly there. Before we go on to talk about what you're doing now, if that's okay, I've just got a quick question. What is it that got you into wanting to do archaeology in the first place? And what shape, before you went to university, what shape did you think your career would have? What did you think before you started studying it that you'd be doing?
Okay. What got me into archaeology? This is one of these questions that I thought about a lot. And I think it was probably due to kind of having parents who were sort of interested in history and kind of would take me and my sister to museums and things like that, and kind of, and was lucky to have that. And I think kind of through a process of osmosis, I just kind of became more interested in it. And it's funny because actually, I think up until I was about 16, I thought, I'm going to do English literature as my degree. I was pretty set on that. Right. But at some point, I think I kind of just took a step back and thought, actually, do I want to do something that seems, at least, and can be, obviously is in terms of field archaeology, very much kind of applied. And because I did classical civilization at A level, I think
that's an interesting A level.
Interesting one, yeah. So because I think I was it was the first year that my school had offered that.
Because you'd nagged.
No. Wasn't quite that bad. And again, like, it was just kind of, I think I almost didn't take that A level. It was because I had sort of an option left, and I thought, what should I do? This seems to combine a kind of history kind of bit of stuff as well. It seems really interesting. And I think, through doing that, and again, I mean, it's because I had the opportunity to do that kind of led me to think, actually, archaeology, this is really interesting. This is something I can actually see myself doing later on. And so that's how I sort of ended up doing that. Although I actually did a classics degree, although I don't know any Greek or Latin.
Where did you do your degree, sir?
So I did my undergrad degree at Cambridge. And I did, my first year was in archaeology and anthropology, but then I ended up switching over to classics sort of for like the second and third year. And I was basically doing classical archaeology. So that was a very, it was a really kind of intense experience is how I describe it. But I think kind of on reflection, I kind of wish I'd sort of stayed with the archaeology kind of side of things at that point, even though I was really interested in like classical archaeology. Then went on to do...
Then went on to work in London, where...
It's funny. Sorry, this just reminded me of something actually at school. When I was doing French A level, and we had to, do the thing of what do you want to be when you're older? Where do you want to live? And somehow I must have said it in French. I have no idea how I'd say it now. Something like, I want to be an archaeologist and live in London. And the people doing kind of the exam just laughed at me. They were like, you can't do archaeology in London. They seriously... Wow. It's amazing. I think about this quite often, just to make me feel better, because I'm like, well, I've proved them wrong.
Right. You might be the first person whose career is just thumbing their nose at their French examiners.
Yeah, it's really funny that it ended up like that. But I mean, I know, even though I say that, and it was something that I sort of said at that time, I don't think I ever actually thought that would happen. I'd really thought to myself, this is definitely the path that I'm going to take. In terms of the shape of my career, I think
I had a very similar experience that just came to my head. When I first left university, I ended up looking for jobs all over the shop, and I went to a group interview for some people who were looking for like selling marketing space in magazines, because I was just taking any job that would go, and like I rang up and I said, I don't want to be considered for any more jobs. And the woman on the other end of the thing was like, why? Have you found a job in archaeology? I was like, yes! Slammed the phone down.
That's brilliant.
It's the only time I've ever managed to pull that one off. Just kind of like, in your face. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
And then I got my first paycheck and went, mistake.
Oh, yeah.
So the shape of your career,
I think really it was kind of me just going, okay, what's going to be the next thing, kind of, if that makes sense. It wasn't really kind of an overall kind of plan, except that I think kind of early on I was very like, oh, I've got to do kind of like strictly the academic thing, and then that didn't go quite as smoothly. I had to kind of reconsider and think, oh, actually, yeah, what can I do? What would be interesting? And yeah, just kind of being lucky enough, I suppose, to kind of get that initial job that then led to other things.
Yeah, you just rolled with it.
To an extent, I think like with each kind of new role that I got, I definitely had probably got to a point where I was thinking, okay, I probably need to do something different at this stage, and then was looking for what sort of suited what skills I had at that point. Yeah.
Which I guess brings us to what you're doing now. What's the difference between your role as a planning archaeologist and moving to sort of a more general consultancy organisation?
Okay, yeah. So I'm still very much doing kind of desk-based kind of planning archaeology stuff, but it's kind of a much kind of higher level, if that makes sense. And when I say that, I mean sort of looking at lots of sites in kind of broad strokes, as opposed to kind of looking at one specific site. So I've recently done something which is called a sustainability appraisal. I've got to get this right, where you're kind of looking at which is to kind of aid with a local kind of authority kind of working out where they can essentially build lots of new houses. So it's
they can avoid the sort of like hotspots of archaeology.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so they've got these kind of potential areas, and the idea is to kind of look at that and again kind of use the HER.
I mean, you can build it there if you want, but you're going to dig through a cathedral.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times where there's been sort of like part of a scheduled monument, sort of like poking into one of these areas, and I'm thinking it's probably not going to work for you.
Yeah. You could do it, but we'll all go to prison. Okay, good luck.
Yeah. So yeah, that has been a bit of a change because it's a different sort of way of looking at things, but still drawing on those same kind of skills.
So is this what you're doing? More sort of like with your planning archaeology, you were at the point where planning applications were being applied for. Are you working now more kind of at the point before the development has even started?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's kind of moving a stage backwards in kind of like the overall sort of life cycle of a project. And also larger scale projects, which when you're kind of used to sort of like staring at kind of like little red outline of a site outline on a computer, like just kind of focusing on that, and suddenly having to look at like bigger areas, and there's lots of them, it's been quite quite a lot to get my head around.
It's a step up when you're looking at the whole of Kent.
It's not quite that bad.
That's the next one. That's the next one.
That's the next. Yeah, I'll come in tomorrow, and they'll be like, "Well, guess what you're doing?" Yeah.
Are you enjoying it at the new place?
I am. Yeah, I think having that kind of change and kind of new challenges has been good, and it's a very different kind of working environment, I think, because there's people from like different disciplines, whether that's like architects or people who look at landscape stuff, ecologists as well. So people who go out and look at bats, which is interesting.
Go out and look at bats.
That's a terrible summary.
I was going to say that's a bat watcher, what you've described there.
There is definitely bats in, but I know that.
Yeah. I know you've just started at the job, so I'm not rushing you into any changes, but do you have any idea what you might want to do next after this?
So in terms of kind of like my wider sort of goals, I think the thing that I'm kind of aiming towards is starting a PhD. But in terms of sort of planning archaeology, that's definitely something I think I want to continue doing. But I'm not sure if I have kind of like any goal, particularly of where I want to go with that. Yeah, that's sort of my vague answer.
Fair enough. What would you want to do your PhD in, though?
So yeah, this kind of goes into the archaeo gaming side of things.
Oh, I know. I'm slick. Don't worry.
I never doubted you.
I was like, I see me a segue, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to point the segue out and how slick it was, so that it's a bad segue.
Good, very good. So I want to do a PhD looking at digital dark tourism, which will take a little bit of unpacking. So, dark tourism.
So, can we first of all, let's go with what is dark tourism, not just blindfolded.
No, although I'm sure that exists, but dark tourism is basically visiting sites that are associated with death or disaster. So very cheery, but so kind
people who go and see the killing fields in
exactly
of the Khmer Rouge, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've kind of done a bit of work looking into the idea that some video games could be considered as digital dark tourism experiences.
Interesting.
Because they contain kind of dark heritage. So dark heritage, like dark tourism being something that's associated with death, disaster, these kind of things. And because they're sort of a commodified experience, it's something that you buy, intentionally wanting to experience a particular kind of environment. It could be argued that they are forms of digital dark tourism.
And there's certainly elements of games where you can see that, I once got a button prompt in a game that will remain nameless that said, press Y to hide amongst the bodies.
Wow.
Yes. So I can see how there's a certain element of... but can you give me like an example maybe of the kind of thing you're talking about where this experience is open to a mass market?
Yeah. I could give you a very specific, probably more kind of like indie game example. But then like maybe kind of extrapolate.
This is not Their Memories. This is the one that's set at an asylum in France.
An asylum in Italy, but yes, good.
Italy.
That's good. Yeah, indeed. Yes. Yeah, so there's a game called The Town of Light, which is set in an Italian asylum, and it's a non-fictional asylum. You can actually go there now. It's derelict, but it still exists. And essentially, the game developers went there, took loads and loads of photographs, and kind of stitched them together to recreate this building. And they've done it so closely that if you put like a photograph of the actual place next to kind of like a screenshot of the building in game, like the similarities are just incredibly striking. So a lot of effort has gone into recreating that space and kind of the atmosphere of it.
Now, there's a technique that we use in historic standing buildings recording called photogrammetry, where you take multiple photographs and from that you can build a 3D model. Is that what they've been using, or have they been putting even more effort than that?
I did ask them about the developer about this actually, because I was really interested, and he said that they didn't use photogrammetry in this instance. I think because like maybe the game engine just couldn't handle using that, or there was some kind of technical difficulty, so they actually had to find another way to kind of stitch all these photos together, kind of like them digitally, which I have no idea how they managed to do that, and I'm sure it was took hours and hours to do, but that kind of like what you were saying, that parallel with historic building recording and photogrammetry, I was definitely thinking of that and thinking that's an interesting kind of link between the two. And the game is really sort of about exploring the asylum, and then you get kind of flashbacks to the asylum as it was in the late 1930s, early 1940s, which of course was a very difficult time for Italy in general. And so,
also, the understatement of the episode just happened.
yeah, they're deliberately kind of focusing on the kind of very difficult heritage of a place that already kind of had a very difficult legacy. That's one way of putting it. And so that was kind of like my main case study to explore this concept. In terms of dark tourism in other games, interesting, because I've been kind of sort of asking myself whether dark tourism can sort of occur in kind of fictional kind of places as well in video games.
Yeah.
So, even something like, I'm trying to think of, I haven't actually played.
What's it called? Something Spec Ops: The Line, things like that.
Yeah.
Because that I mean, it's not dark tourism necessarily. It's for a podcast called Ask an Archaeologist. We are straying from our usual topics.
Yeah.
But that has themes in it of essentially, they take the player character and lead them into committing a war crime, essentially. Like, what is the appeal to an audience to experience places and activities that are so deviant to their lives and society?
I mean, this is a really good question, and I don't think it has been answered definitively. Like, I've read sort of like articles about the concept of dark tourism, people kind of questioning, is this actually really a thing? And like, there's so many different kind of examples you could think of that on a spectrum or something like that. Kind of one theory is that this idea that kind of death has become something that isn't kind of publicly engaged with in a way that means that people can kind of see if I can sort of explain this in a way that makes sense. It's kind of this idea that it's almost fetishized because it's sort of hidden, and
Right.
so there's perhaps kind of a desire to experience it, or kind of manifestations of death kind of vicariously through tourism, or like as you say, through video games. I guess there's it depends. Like, there are lots of different kind of ways of looking at it. You can look at it more cynically and say, is it just voyeurism? Is it just about kind of a shock factor, or potentially it's people kind of working through kind of their own ideas about those things, or to learn something.
Can archaeological sites exist in a beneficial manner in a digital realm when the main purpose of the thing that they exist in is for entertainment?
That's a very good question. Right. That's going to take some thought. So I suppose when you say an archaeological site, if we're thinking of, for example, like in that case, the asylum, that is essentially, it's a historic building. So that could be considered an archaeological site, being kind of recreated in this game, and essentially for entertainment purposes. I feel very conflicted about it, because as someone who's kind of doing all this research into it, it's kind of not lost on me that I'm sort of, I am also a dark tourist, or I'm someone that's very interested in these other people being dark tourists. So what's really my motivation for that anyway? But then, there's a sense of, are we kind of exploiting the site, or kind of essentially creating something that seems like it might be kind of objective, but of course it isn't, because even just the act of like taking all those photographs of the building, that was an act of interpretation, and putting it all together, deciding how it's going to look, what kind of things to edit out or not. These are all decisions that the developers made, so it's not objective. you could kind of question, well, why did they focus on that part of the site's history? There were lots of other, elements of its history, like, for example, its contemporary existence now, where it's sort of become this kind of weird derelict building that's full of graffiti, for example, that's just kind of, it's a very kind of weirdly playful kind of building, as opposed to kind of like this very upsetting, I don't know how to put it, like, space that exists in the video game.
It has undeniable links to horrific undertakings. It's a dark spot on humanity. In the same way that, so you're saying it's Italy in the 30s and 40s, and it's a site of a game, and these people have had, would you go as far as atrocities perpetrated on them?
Yeah, I think,
because I'm leading up essentially to saying, are there sites that are the dark tourism element of them is so terrible that they would not appear in games? And the clear example of that is like Auschwitz, Birkenau, things like that.
I think, to my knowledge, although I'm now even questioning, I'm thinking, do they appear in any video games? I feel like
I'm now thinking, like, oh god, I bet they do.
I think I want to say, I was about to be like, well, that, people would feel very, very uncomfortable about that.
Yeah.
But then I think, actually, they probably do exist in some form in a game. I don't know of the game, but I feel like it's quite likely. But yeah, as you were saying, I mean, what would that mean if they formed the backdrop to, say, some kind of first-person shooter game? I mean, that would just saying that feels like almost, it's viscerally kind of,
it feels very wrong, doesn't it?
But then, if we were to kind of think about kind of just the digitization of those spaces, what would that mean? Because maybe some people would say, well, that means they're more accessible for some people. Maybe that's useful in an educational sense. I'm trying to think of, but again, like, what does that mean, making a kind of digital version of something, that whole process of making it anyway, and then what it becomes?
We'll move away from that sort of thing, because I think there's something else there that's quite interesting, just touched on. Making a digital record of a place, allowing people to experience it and visit it. Is the digital record of a historic and archaeological site a sufficient experience of that place for someone? To the point where, like, is the educational value of experiencing things through a digital medium equal to visiting it in reality?
No, I think.
Well, I'm glad that was a long-winded question.
No, I mean, like, it's a good question, because I think sometimes you can kind of get extreme responses to the digital, especially with heritage, where some people might say, like, oh, it'll never be like the real thing, whatever that is, right? It can, I mean, which is true in the sense that, as technology is, we can't replicate. I mean, you can have sound, that's true. You could, like, record the sounds at a particular site and put that into the digital experience, whatever it is. But smell and, like, kind of having that tactile element would be, smell, I don't think we can really do, or be very difficult. Touch, yeah, maybe, but incredibly difficult again. So you haven't got that kind of, like, sensorial experience of a site. But on the other hand, you might have people, like, claiming that this is the answer to kind of problems of accessibility, or kind of, well, I'm sort of going off onto a slightly different topic, but if we're talking about things, for example, kind of one suggestion that's been put forward for the repatriation of certain artifacts in museums is that maybe we could have replicas or digital versions, and then the original could be replaced, and kind of that sort of argument, where I guess essentially it's about people saying, here's a compromise, here's how the digital can help us kind of deal with these problems. But of course at the same time, it's never really that kind of like clear cut. I think that the digital provides a different experience, because it's not just about kind of so for example with a video game, your experience of that isn't just about what's on the screen. It's kind of, it's about the hardware you're using, kind of where you are, whether you're playing on your PC or whatever. There's kind of there's this concept called the assemblage of play, which a person called T.L. Taylor has kind of written about as this idea, of like how playing a game is, a combination of lots of different things. It's the person kind of interacting with the hardware and then like the software of the game as well, all part of this assemblage. And I really like that because of course they used the words assemblage, which is
an archaeological term.
Which made me really happy, and I was like, I get where you're coming from with this. So it's incredibly difficult, but I mean certainly just saying like, we can just create a digital version of this site or this object, and that's a replacement. I don't think that will ever really kind of work.
The idea of archaeogaming.
Yes.
I've heard it used to describe several different things.
Yeah.
Like using archaeological approaches to understand, sort of the community of gaming, if you will. The objects and that sort of side of things, quite a modern approach with it. The use of archaeological sites, the replication of the things like Assassin's Creed, for example, where which one was it where they released a version where you could go on a tour of ancient Egypt?
Oh yes, I think that was Origins, I want to say.
Yeah. And there was no fighting. It was just like a walking simulator of the major sites that they'd recreated for the background. And also I've seen people looking at trying to understand the archaeology of environments that don't exist. So like trying to understand the societies that went before the dystopian first person shooter that you're in, by applying archaeological processes to the art assets within a game's world.
Yeah.
How do you understand archaeogaming?
Right. This is the question, like for me as someone who does archaeogaming, and it's the most difficult but kind of most interesting question. Kind of that thing, okay, what is archaeogaming? And of course loads of people ask me this because what is it? And like
it's usually the first question.
I'm asking myself,
what is this?
Okay, the really honest answer is that I still don't really know. I can't get. If I was being really honest, I'd say I don't think we have a definitive answer of what it is yet, but that's not very helpful. So what I'm going to say is, it's you gave lots of examples there, and I think it's all of those things, which is why it can be a bit confusing and sort of kind of, you've got to think about multiple kind of layers to it at once, which you could do. So as you say, for example, if say we thought of one specific game, if you were just looking at one, you could look at the hardware that it's played on. So let's say it was played on a Nintendo GameCube. You could look at that object kind of as an archaeological artifact. But then you could look at kind of the software that runs on it as well, whether there have been different iterations over time. Have people modded it? Things like that.
Like so what physics engines does it use?
Exactly.
And stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah. But then you can also look at kind of the immaterial culture of that game, because it's kind of like the material culture of gaming, I guess. The immaterial, kind of those digital spaces that don't exist in the same way that kind of analog spaces do, which is a kind of a bit mind-bending when you try and think about how that works from an archaeological perspective. But kind of looking at maybe different art assets or doing a kind of a version of landscape archaeology within that space. But also you can kind of look at it for representations of archaeology and heritage in video games, and kind of like the ethics of that as well. So, for example, Megan Dennis has written her PhD thesis on kind of like the ethics of how archaeology is represented in video games. So, for example, kind of look at things like looting practices in games.
Lara Croft.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a massive trope in video games. I mean, archaeology and heritage is like, it appears in so many video games, but in a very specific way. Which is not really...
let's just fill your pockets.
Exactly, which isn't really what archaeology is.
Yeah. So what you'd like is a button prompt that says press X to slowly record the entire site.
If I knew that was simple, imagine.
Certainly would help.
Yeah. So, but for me, I think, because I was sort of thinking about this earlier and thinking, okay, so where does like dark tourism or dark heritage in video games fit into that? I suppose it's sort of in a way, it's kind of looking at the representations of heritage and how that's kind of dealt with in kind of like digital spaces. I suppose that's kind of the way I'm coming at it from. I'm really interested in all the different kind of approaches that there could be to kind of that intersection between archaeology and video games.
Okay, really interesting. I think we're pretty much coming to the end of things now. So first of all, thank you very much for your time. It's been really interesting. I've only got a couple more questions for you. Okay. So I think a really important one right now is, would you prefer having a sight cat or a sight dog?
Oh no, that's a terrible question. Because I'm thinking, oh no. I'm not allowed to say both.
No, I'm sorry. No one's been allowed so far, and I'm not starting now.
That's fair. Okay. Ooh. This is difficult. I would go with I think I'd go with a dog, because I feel like dog would probably enjoy the experience more. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect answer. And now the last question. This is one I ask everyone. You work in the heritage industry. But how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, wow, what a question. I guess, I'd like to be remembered as an archaeo gamer, someone who did something perhaps a little bit unexpected, but interesting. Does that work as an answer?
I think that works as a perfectly good answer. Florence, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to plug before I let you go?
Not particularly, just that you can find me on Twitter. It's at Florence SN.
Okay, see you later. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Ask an Archaeologist podcast with me, Paul Duncan McGarrity. The music you were listening to was by From the Ashes. Check them out on Bandcamp. It was produced by me, Paul Duncan McGarrity. You can follow me on Twitter at AskAnArch, or you can send an email at askanarch@gmail.com. But most importantly, if you've enjoyed yourself and you think you have a friend who might be interested in the podcast, please tell them about it. Write a review, put up a star rating, let people know that we're here. It's incredibly helpful and much appreciated. Once again, thank you to everyone who has asked an arc. Bye-bye.